Welcome to RC Aerobatics Podcast. In this episode, we talk to Matt Balazs. Matt is involved with the F3S Aerobatic Jets. We talk about his history, how we got into jets, and how the F3S has evolved over the last several years. We also talk about how you can get involved in aerobatic jets with a simple foam EDF. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Welcome, Matt. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Rich, for having me.
Well, I tell you what, I'm pretty excited having you on board here. As I think everybody, the Jets are pretty exciting to me, so it'll be cool talking about this a good bit.
Yeah, they come a long way for sure. So a little bit of tie-in, more on the aerobatic side, the newest piece in the world of aerobatics with jets, right?
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. So what's a little bit about your background? How did you start, and how did you get into the jets?
Yeah, so the long history of it is I kind of was born into the hobby. So my dad was, my dad started flying a year before I was born, and that was 74. So I'm born in 75 and started going to the flying field at 3 years old. And my dad was involved in pattern in the late 70s into the 80s, and of course I was too, right? So we all follow along
Mm-hmm.
that kind of path. So a lot of pattern through the 80s into the early 90s, and really liked the scale aerobatic stuff. I got heavily involved with IMAC then, probably in the early to mid 90s. Then kind of took a break through high school and all that, cars and girls and all that good stuff, and then
Absolutely.
went to school, and it's like the natural progression, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then got married and wound up moving to North Carolina, and there was a flying field 8 minutes from my house. And I was doing a lot of car stuff then, and I had a couple buddies that, pointed out the flying field down there and didn't know that I flew. And so started flying some sports stuff again. And 2 years later, I was hard into the Southeast region with IMAC, and, moved along from there, flew the worlds and all that, and in 2014, and got kind of burned out a little bit just from so much practice. But also just before then, I started flying jets. Always liked kind of the scale stuff. I thought it was neat. And as I say, I started my bucket list of model airplanes, and one of them was a jet. And so I started off with a Hawk and realized how capable it actually was. You look at like a BAE Hawk, and it's a low wing airplane, and the tail sits, pretty high up on the stab, and you're seeing a
Uh-huh.
vertical fin here, and you're thinking, man, this thing's going to couple terribly, right?
Right.
Not at all. Fly straight as an arrow. And
Wow.
that's where we started with jets. And yeah, it's a good time.
Oh, well, good deal. Good deal. Well, to kind of start off the conversation in the F3S, what is the name of the organization, and what is the organization that kind of controls what's going on?
Yeah, so that's actually a really neat thing about this is that, growing up and when I did, we went through the change with pattern, right? With AMA pattern being really the center box maneuver thing to, or we went to an FAI turnaround style pattern in the late 80s into really where it is today, right? Which is full box, 2 meter airplanes and all that. And so what happens is that, that transition for the AMA side of things was a little different. And we lost some people on the way, of course, brought some more people in that time frame. And of course, then you have IMAC, which really started in the US, was really based here. And of course, now you see, what was F3M, which was similar type of airplanes, but the format and the flying of what they were doing was very different until a few years ago, which, as you know, very, very well aware, that basically they're more or less flying IMAC in FAI as well. So to answer your question, it is completely supported and kind of centralized by FAI out of France, Europe overall, of course. So it's actually a very interesting thing in a sense that we started this from the beginning as a world level competition. So the
Mm-hmm.
entire world has the same rules from day one. We're not going through transitions of something else into something else and of all the politics along with that. Of course, this is from day one this way. So it really started in, I believe it was 2010 or 2011. I know 2011 is when they really started the first sequence they put out under provisional class. I saw it probably around 2012 or something like that, and I thought it was pretty interesting and started fooling around with my first hawk with some of the
Mm-hmm.
maneuvers. And I thought, so, I was looking for that thing to kind of get me going on practice and something else, right?
Right.
So what happens here is then 2015 held the first contest here in the States. I was here actually tied to a pattern contest. Being FAI, a lot of the rules are more or less the same as far as like how we're in a box. Of course, the box is a little bit wider. It's 150 degrees, which is a lot bigger than you have for a pattern box. But there's the centering criteria and the deductions and the scoring and all that is exactly the same. And so when it comes down to the format fits actually into a pattern class. So being where I was in middle North Carolina, Winston-Salem, the Winston-Salem club there is really big in pattern. And those guys were gracious enough to allow us to add a class into their pattern event. And really, it was supposed to be three of us that flew, but it wound up being two of us, Archie Stafford and myself. And Archie was hooked. Yeah, it was a good time for sure, and that's where things really started. So we're involved. We kind of have our informal group here called Jet Precision Aerobatics,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm involved with the FAI on the CIAM board to help steer what the rules are going to be in the classes, and that has gone through a lot of changes too.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, starting off as a provisional class in around 2011 when we flew it in 2015, it really nothing changed. So the maneuvers themselves, the sequence was the same, all that was there, but it was really loose. There really wasn't defined rules about what the aircraft was supposed to be. When you read it, it didn't really make a lot of sense. You weren't sure. It kind of lended towards a pattern where it kind of hinted around about being like a 2 meter type airplane, but it never said that.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't have any limits on the type of aircraft, the size of it, or anything. So it was very kind of loose. So going into 2015, well, I should say 2016, 2018 rule change, they brought me in and said, hey, you guys are running some of these events. It would be great to get your input into this. So guys like Seba Silvestri, that obviously he's been around the IMAC
Mm-hmm.
and pattern world a long time, and I've known him personally for a number of years. And he called me and said, hey, do you think you can, you have a lot of interest there with this. Do you think we can get some input from you guys? And I said, sure. So we got involved with the work group, and I think there were 6 or 8 of us on the work group around the world, and really worked a lot in the rules. And their version of things and where we were initially was very different. We ended up,
Mm-hmm.
I think, somewhere really good. As I mentioned to you before earlier, is that we wanted to be really inclusive. So what we didn't want to do is turn this into like a aircraft specific type thing right away. We wanted to be able to have. There's a lot of guys flying sport jets today, so we wanted
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that they could participate and get people involved without having to have some class specific airplane to start. And that's
Right.
kind of where we are today.
Okay, very good. I gotta ask you. You talk about not having limits before and developing those rules. How large can the jets be? Because some of the ones we see are fairly
Yeah.
large.
Yeah, so it's a good question. So where we ended up is that the aircraft have to fit into a 3.5 by 3.5 meter box. That's big.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
That's really
that's
big.
pretty big.
But there is a weight limit of 55 pounds or 25 kilos. And that's mainly due because of a lot of the countries outside the US have that limit anyway for the aircraft, especially Europe, of course. So
Mm-hmm.
there are no thrust limits on the FAI rules. Of course, in the States, we have a 50-pound thrust limit for anything under 55 pounds. So we do try to follow the rules as much as possible to be in AMA and what FAI says. Gyros are allowed. That was one of the first things as far as airplane type aircraft that FAI did agree with us to run the gyros because they realized that it
Mm-hmm.
didn't really change the way things worked, but it helped from a safety standpoint with taking off and landing. It does change. The jets just fly very differently. They're like really high
Uh-huh.
powered gliders in a lot of ways. So
Right.
yeah, so the rules are pretty open. So there's not a tremendous amount of limitations. I think on that, and of course, EDF is allowed too, right? So it doesn't just have to be
Mm-hmm.
turbine jets. And that you see that a lot with kind of taking off in kind of pockets around the U.S. I know in parts of the Southeast, there's a couple guys that run a pattern contest, and they also run an EDF class. We have that kind of tied into our group too. But you can run ADF in any class. There's no limit to it. I believe, if I remember correctly, I think they set it at 14S is what the limit was for that. Initially, they tried to make it 10S, which didn't make any sense for a ducted
Right.
fan to split, right? And I think you
Yeah.
guys are on the pattern side are kind of looking at going to 12S maybe or something, I believe.
Yeah, the U.S. rules went into effect this year for 12S, and it's always amazed me because I mean I've flown the bigger IMAX style planes for years at 12 and 15S, and you know it was always the safety card was always thrown out there for the 10S. I said, well, there's a lot of people flying the
Without
higher
this,
voltage and doing an okay job, but so yeah, that's coming for sure. When you say the EDS and stuff are allowed, is that a completely different class? Are they flying with the larger jets, or how does that
yeah, so
work?
let me explain the structure of the class first. So that's a good question. So maybe just to clarify kind of how it works. So with FAI, they typically only set up and manage really the world level competition, right? So they're looking,
Hmm.
if you look at like F3A for example, it's one class, right? It's the top
Right.
class. And same thing with F3M. When you look at what they're doing there, it's really one class. And this is the same way. So F3S is the name of the class, and
Hmm.
the format is there's um, a P sequence, so
Hmm.
preliminary sequence like you would for a pattern, and then there's a
Right.
final sequence, an F sequence as well. And there's also a freestyle. So there's a
Okay.
4 minute freestyle built into this too, absolutely. So, and the way that it's structured is that, I don't know the exact weighting of the scores because we haven't had a world's level competition yet, but the idea is that all of those components we consider for the total score. So it does bring kind of elements of really precise stuff from pattern, and also brings kind of that freestyle aspect into it too. So people are drawn to that. So that's really that's what F3S is in essence as far as the world level class. In the
Hmm.
states, what we've been doing is we've been flying the F3S sequence in our F3S class, both the P and the F. We've been not, of course, forcing people to fly freestyle unless they really want to fly freestyle. We kind of keep it as a separate score to class, right? Because it is so
Right.
different, right? Kind of like
Hmm.
what happened with IMAX, too, right? Um,
Right.
then what we do with as far as the Jet Precision Aerobatics, which is really myself and Archie and Wayne Matthews, as you know, a long time with
Hmm.
IMAC. He's involved, wanting to help out with it. He's really enthusiastic about it and learning along the way. So he helps us a lot with the website and some online things.
Hmm.
But what happens is that we have some other classes. We want to again make this really inclusive, which I think is really important. We're trying
Hmm.
to get people excited about a different segment in the hobby. And I think that when you look at if you go to a jet event or you come to an F3S event, you will see a lot of people that have been flying pattern maybe 10,
Hmm.
15 years ago or even relatively recently, or IMAC that were kind of got bored, right, or where they didn't have time
Right.
to go out and fly 3 4 days a week to be competitive anymore,
Hmm.
whatever for whatever reason. So what we do is we kind of split it up. So what we want to do is we want to be able to have folks come with basically any kind of jet that they want to compete with and be competitive. So, of course, we have the F3S class, which is the top class.
Right.
Then we had so we have a nationals that we ran the last couple of years, and it's structured this way. We have the F3S class. We have F3S Silver, which is just the P sequence. So there is a
Right.
big jump in the complexity if you look at the sequences between the P and F, right?
Yeah.
That's
No
when you get
different than
into like the
pattern.
one
That's right.
roll. Oh yeah, just like pattern. Yeah, you have the one row rolling loops and knife edge Humpty bumps and we even have like an avalanche, which to see jet snap is always an interesting thing. But yeah, so a lot of guys don't want to do that, so they fly the silver class. But then what happens is in F3S there's also the F3S B sequence they call it. They actually do have a second class. I forgot to mention that earlier.
Hmm.
So that is center box maneuver only, that class. So what happens is that we use that sequence, that B sequence, for guys that are getting into the jets for the first time and they want to fly a class. We do that sequence. We also use that same sequence for scale jets. So we have a scale jet class, but they're flying the B sequence. So we're basically using the FAI format and trying to bring other types of aircraft into it. And then we do have an EDF class that we've created here. And it's designed really for the smaller, 4S, any EDF is capable to fly it, but we designed it really after, how do we go after some of the lower level, $300, $150 EDFs that guys want to come in with foam to get started and participate. So as I say all the time, our nationals is really inclusive. You're going to see a lot of different stuff there. You'll see from the $150 foaming to the $30,000 scale jet and anything in between. So it's kind of neat to go see.
I bet it is. It sounds like it'd be pretty exciting to watch for sure. They kind of get us an idea of how you kind of develop the baseline rules as this goes on. How does since you're kind of affiliated with FAI, how do you guys change the rules? Is there a process for that, or you guys involved in that, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we're involved in it for sure. And what happens is that even like the sequence we're flying right now, we were flying in nationals at Muncie, I think in 2018. Archie Stafford's been the CD for those, and we'll bring him into another session at some point and go through some of that. But what we did is we had some trials, and so we had some different sequences we had put together as proposals for FAI, and we got some of the guys at the end of the day to go and fly them and see what they thought. Some of the things that people thought were afraid of, for example, one roll loop. A couple of guys were like, these are never going to be able to do this. And we go and fly through it right away. It's like, okay, there's a couple shots at it. We can clean this up, make it look nice. So trying to get input from the pilots themselves, and then of course back on the work group, of course, working with them. Now COVID, of course, has really rattled everything for us. This is because what happens being a preliminary type class, we don't really have regular rule changes yet. So there has to be so many there has to be so many national events to be considered to get it to move from a preliminary to a full class.
Oh, okay. All right, gotcha.
We haven't had just because of COVID. I mean, Europe's been closed down. Those guys are happy if they actually have a flying field that's open right now. So we got a couple years, I think, for that. But I have been back and forth with them a little bit about maybe changing some of the sequences, maybe in another year, just to keep people engaged and from that perspective.
Right. So until that comes, you'll just fly the same sequences for that.
Yep.
Okay, very good.
Yep.
Now I did see on the website that you have a scheduled Nats for this year.
We do. It's in August, and that is we've had it the last 2 years, 3 years. I guess it's been the last 2 years. Well, we didn't have it last year because of COVID. The year before that and the year before that, we've had it in Mountain City Airport in Tennessee, which I don't really want to tell people about too much because it's like a hidden gem. But at the same time, I want to tell everybody it's awesome to fly there. It's a little town just on the other side of the mountains in western Tennessee. And Eastern Tennessee, just on the Appalachian side. It reminds me of if you ever seen like the World Jet Masters or where they fly in Switzerland and you see like the mountain sides behind it, all that, and it looks amazing.
Yeah.
A little version of that is what it looks like, and it's this county airport that's there, and a guy named Dave Guerin, he's the airport manager. He actually started off as an RC guy as well. Flew IMAC for years himself, and his wife kept saying, "Your airplanes, you keep getting bigger. Why don't you get a full scale?" Got into full scale, and next thing you know, he's an AMP. Next thing you know, he's an AMP building, home builds and runs the airport as well. So, so he's really, really supportive of us, of being there and everything. It's neat.
That's cool.
It's mid-August. Yep.
Yep. You let the cat out the bag now. Everybody knows where it is.
He's a good guy. I would say if you're interested in running events, you can absolutely reach out to him. The town is really supportive too, so it's a fun time to go there. We have it in August, which in the South, people are like, God, it's going to be so hot. Part of the reason it is where it is because it's cool. It's cool there.
Right.
When we were in Central North Carolina, it's 95 degrees. It's on the other side of the mountains at about 3,000 feet, and the density altitude isn't bad because it's cooler. It's only like it's 10, 15 degrees cooler there, so it actually works out to be pretty nice.
Oh, that is nice. Being down south, our events kind of slow down in August, as you can guess. it gets a little unbearable for sure.
Yeah.
Have you guys, or do you guys have a relationship with the AMA, or is this considered a SIG or anything like
No, there's
that?
no SIG yet. That's something actually I reached out to Tony about a little bit to see if we need to get something started. We've been kind of working between, a little bit with the pattern guys, of course. There's been a couple articles I think I put with Archie in
Mm-hmm.
NSRCA maybe a year or two ago as they kind of get people involved. But yeah, it's one of those things that we want to promote it and we want it to be fun. That's one of the first things. We want to make sure that this doesn't become, another class where people get frustrated and feel the pressure. We want to be a little bit easier as far as
Right.
less stress level, right? So we're not looking to
Mm-hmm.
have contests every weekend, that kind of thing. I think this is one of those things that the guys that are involved in it, they would like to go to a couple contests a year, which we are working on. You've got some guys out west that have had some, got a couple in Florida, tied to IMAC contests, quite a bit of them as well.
Mm-hmm.
We did one down in Georgia at the IMAC Nationals and Southeast Nationals. We did was it last fall, I believe. Um,
Yeah, with I think Primo had told me about that. Yeah,
yep, yep. And I was there. It was a fun time. Pretty windy to fly a jet. It was 15 mile an hour dead crosswind. That's always interesting on final.
I
So,
bet.
but
Glad you got your gyro, huh?
I'll tell you, man, I hit a rotor coming over a tree, and yeah,
Oh,
there was
geez.
some tough times there. Yeah, it doesn't recover quite the same way. Everything with a jet with landing. Here's the thing with gyros and jets. Is why it's so important. Is everything with landing a jet is wrong. So you have an airplane that is you're trying to slow this thing down, right? And
Mm-hmm.
your control surfaces are not very effective when it gets really slow, right?
Right. No prop wash. Yeah.
No prop wash, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they tend to be smaller surfaces than like an IMAC airplane, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're trying to land this thing. You have to really stall it to get it to land. There's no other way around it. So we've got flaps in it. We've got big draggy flaps trying to get it to come down. And at the same time, the plane weighs about 10 pounds less when you took off. So it feels different right away, right? We carry
Wow.
a lot of fuel.
Yeah.
Fuel, that's something you start noticing right away with some of the jets is how they behave differently through a flight because the amount of weight loss. Think about this with like a pattern airplane. Can you imagine losing a third of its weight while you were flying it?
Hmm. That'd be
Why is
crazy.
it different from the beginning of the flight to the end?
Yes.
So here you are bringing this thing in, and now you have to land it really slow because now it's really light, and now the throttle doesn't work because the throttle is really slow when you get on the turbine when you get below half throttle, it really gets laggy. It doesn't like you
Mm-hmm.
give it throttle and nothing really happens. So you've really got to stay with it, and that's where the gyro does help and take out a lot of those bumps and swirls for us because we just can't react fast enough. You know.
Yeah. I can imagine. And you've got enough invested in most of those jets where you don't want to have any hiccups on landing for sure.
Yeah, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to see people lose their airplanes either. That was part of it too. We want people to have fun and not be stressed out and feel like, hey, it's hard enough at a contest for some people. They get in front of a set of judges and they nerves come up and that kind of thing. And we don't want
Mm-hmm.
people to freaking
Yeah.
out landing it.
Speaking of which, is it pilot judged? Is everybody self-judged, or how do you do the judging?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's part of where we are right now, right? So we have enough interest now where we do the nationals and we are doing contestant judging. We've done some peer judging as well, which actually I know is very controversial in kind of the world of
Mm-hmm.
aerobatics, but we've proven it actually works pretty well. Um, and I think that we do use what do you call that system that basically validates the scoring in pattern? What's that?
Oh, I know what you're saying. Like the word would be. I don't remember the name of
I
the
can't think of
system
what it's
you're
called right
talking
now. I'm
about.
kind of
Yeah.
going brain dead. But yeah,
Yeah.
basically validates, every time you score me or whatever else, it looks at, is there bias? Does Rich not
Right.
like Matt? So he keeps giving him lower
Yeah.
scores. Or Rich's buddies at Matt, he keeps giving him higher scores. Kind of takes those anomalies out, right? So we run that
Right.
through in it as well, just so you know, it's not, it is, we are using that scoring system basically that pattern uses to manage it. So it's a little bit different than IMAC that way. But
Mm-hmm.
if you,
Do you
if you
require
guys,
your contestants to go through some judging school or training, and or how do you guys disseminate that kind of information?
Yeah, so we just actually had it. We had a judging school last year. Archie ran a series of them, which was actually really good to do that because there were a lot of questions of things that we thought were pretty normal that turned out that they weren't so normal.
Yeah.
And what I'll say is that's really good is that and this, you've been in IMAC and pattern now for a little while. You know,
Mm-hmm.
IMAC years ago in pattern, the way that they were structured when they were both in a box was actually a lot more similar, right? There were center
Mm-hmm.
criteria, right? So you used to
Right.
have, pattern still has it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there is that piece where we get some of the IMAC guys coming in that really never dealt with center box. They
Right.
have to know what's centered. So for example, like a figure nine, a lot of guys were coming into the box and they'd fly the vertical maneuver part of a figure nine and they'd roll, and the vertical is on the center line. That's not the
Right.
center of the maneuver,
Yeah.
right? It's that that quarter loop here has to match the first quarter loop on the top, right? And it's that
Right.
top piece. So some of that stuff is important. So we've been kind of walking it through that way. Like I said,
Mm-hmm.
Archie and Wayne had gone through and did a bunch of examples. But Archie ran some of the schools last year before the last national, and we're going to probably do more of that. We've been trying to get more of that kind of content out on the website. Also, FAI has actually been posting a bunch and giving us kind of some guidelines for scoring each maneuver now too, which we didn't have. Being a
Right.
preliminary class, they don't usually do that kind of stuff, but I think they've started adding in for the same reasons. So yeah,
Yeah.
so we're going to get more of that for sure. I think we need to have some more of those judging schools, and I hate to call it judging schools because it really actually helps them more from a piloting standpoint anyway, to fly the maneuver
Right.
correctly. But yeah, so is
Yeah.
judging
When
at sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna comment that when we do our judging schools in the IMAC, it's more of a conversation and just everybody talking about the rules, and it really does help in the flying aspect because you understand what's going on.
You can't win the game if you don't know the rules of the game,
Absolutely.
right? Those
Absolutely.
basics, yeah. So that's exactly it. So FAI, of course, recognized some of that too. So they've been helping out with some of those things, and that's part of it too. Like we've intentionally not added a lot of people to what would be a SIG yet, mainly to keep it simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
Really, Archie and I kind of bang through a lot of stuff, and then we'll bounce a lot of things off Wayne as well to get some more input. But where we are now, I think, is in a pretty good steady state. And the thing about it is we don't have to create a lot of administration and a lot of complexity. Right now, what our main focus is about awareness and promoting it and helping
Mm-hmm.
people to get started with events and see where it goes.
Oh, well, good. That makes a lot of sense because I know once you become a SIG, there's a lot of additional guidelines and rules you have to follow, and when you're growing,
Yeah.
sometimes you need the ability to turn on a dime if you need to correct something, and I guess that's a good way to look at it. Well, very
Yeah,
good.
we wanted to make sure things were set up as well with FAI from the beginning, right? So that we didn't go down a path on our own. Because I mean, let's face it, you have with pattern, you still have the AMA pattern side of things, and you're
Mm-hmm.
dealing with FAI kind of in between, right? So
Right.
you've got and of course to be in harmony to not confuse people when there's rule change with FAI. Typically, those things. What I've seen is they kind of follow along on the AMA side to kind of follow to make it consistent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something we want to make sure that we don't do is cause a bunch of internal issues. So I think I reached out to Tony to see what we need to do to set up a SIG to get it kind of more formalized. But that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of the next steps I think as well.
Okay. Well, very good. Coming through this process and promoting something new like this, and having been in the older disciplines in the past, uh, how does that shape and what does like the general RC aerobatics just world kind of mean to you and in your direction on doing this?
Yeah, I mean I like it a lot. I mean that's part of the reason why I thought the Jets was a cool thing. If you looked at pattern when I was growing up as a kid, one of the things that was neat about it, and it still is that way, a lot of those guys they kind of be the techie guys, right? They tend to be the guys that are
Mm-hmm.
really into the aerodynamics, right?
Right.
This is a whole new world.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about jets is that even though they're extremely complicated, right? You've got uh, a landing gear system in there that we haven't had in pattern airplanes in a long time, nor IMAC
Mm-hmm.
airplanes. They've got gear doors on them. They've got brakes on them. And you look at the turbines themselves, right? The turbines, um, they've gotten a lot better, but I would say especially in the last like 5, 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember some of the guys when we first started, they were not used to being on a clock, right? So we get them started, and
Right.
like you've got got 2 minutes to put the plane in the air. And they're like, well, it won't, it's shutting down. I'm like, you got 2 minutes, man. You know what I mean? So what happens is like the equipment and what people are starting to use is getting better and better. And of course that feedback back to some of the turbine manufacturers, and seeing that kind of reliability is I think is always driven from competition, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
obviously the cost of this stuff, it's not cheap, right? I mean, a typical
Right.
turbine we're using is, $2,500 to $4,000, depending on the size of it and who it's from.
Mm-hmm.
But when it wasn't reliable, that makes it, a lot less fun, right?
No doubt.
So what I would say is where we are right now is it kind of feels like the late 90s as far as gasoline engines. You started having,
Mm-hmm.
3W is probably the first real, ZDZ, 3W, those companies really started making some real good, larger gas engines for aircraft. And 3W was really expensive at the time, if you remember.
Right.
And then you had DA come on board, and really the service and support from Dave Johnson, those guys at DA is, to me, I love that stuff. I mean, I
No
say all
doubt.
the time, we're the DA of turbines today, and so I think
Mm-hmm.
that that is being pushed, and you're seeing a lot of advancement on the turbine side itself. Um, so that kind of like mechanical complexity of things, I think, is a draw. I know it does to
Mm-hmm.
me, and I know when I got helped Wayne get started, and he was dead set against gyros, same as I when I first started, and then when I started seeing really what it does and how the airplane flies differently through the air, you realize that the guy that was going to win is still going to be the guy that won.
Right.
It doesn't
Right.
fly the airplane. So what it does is it smooths things out. It does take some workload out, right? I'm not gonna lie, it does do that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you in some ways it makes it harder. When you're rolling a jet, the wings aren't as light. You've got landing gear in them, um, and when you let go or go to stop at a point, if
Mm-hmm.
with the gyro, when you stop, it really stops. So if you're off,
Yeah.
it's very blatant that you're off, and you can't just like slide it through because it stops it. So there
Right.
are some hindrances that people don't realize sometimes of that too. But I
Mm-hmm.
think the complexity of the airplanes is kind of like that, right? That's kind of the draw for that. And just to do something different, right? I mean, you're flying these the jets. I mean, they'll fly in a box. I mean, obviously we're not doing
Mm-hmm.
200 miles an hour through a sequence. It would be impossible to do that to fit in the box. But
Right.
I've seen plenty of planes flying 130, 150 miles an hour, and our first sequences, when you look at them, people go, "Oh, this is really simple." Yeah, except that we don't have the lag in power. It's all energy management through it. We can't just power through things
Right.
um, because you'll be too fast all the time. So it's really a lot of finesse that's
Mm-hmm.
required for it, really understanding the airplane. It's just very different all the
Yeah.
way around.
I think in a lot of the disciplines, IMAC pattern and all of them, it's like, yeah, you might be able to fly that, but can you fly it well?
Yeah, well, it goes back to the centering and stuff, right? So,
Right.
you're pulling radius through things, and you're looking at where the rolls are, and all of a sudden you can't come ripping through there, so you've really got to control the turbine and the speed of the jet itself. They're not draggy as much. And that's actually next evolution now. If you talk about aircraft, right? Where we started with this, I was flying a Futura from Tomahawk, and that was
Mm-hmm.
known to be one of the first, as they called it, a constant speed jet. And
Right.
in the jet world, when that thing came out, you either loved it or hated it.
Hmm.
It looked like a whale going through the air. It's big fat fuselage, it's got fat wings on it, but it's designed to help control speed, right?
Right.
So I saw those on the ground at first, and I was like, "Good God, that thing is horribly ugly." And then I watched it fly, and when you're a precision aerobatic pilot, you can see something that flies well in a heartbeat, and I'm like,
Right.
"Wow."
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I had two of those. But the next generation of aircraft you see really from as far as for F3S specifically, I would say is from Seba with he had the Ares just
Mm-hmm.
came out. That's a hell of a jet for the sequencing, and a bunch of us are flying the car from Mephisto's, and Mephisto's
Oh
a
yeah.
hell of an airplane. So we've been able to it's kind of the next step with a lot of the aircraft. And that's what I mean about kind of like the late 90s, right? Even
Mm-hmm.
when you looked at IMAC, airplanes changed tremendously from
Right.
1999 to 2010. it was like a revolution of aircraft and engines and servos and
Mm-hmm.
everything else that happened. That's kind of where we are with the jets right now too.
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah, now in IMAC, everybody, it's Cardin and DA200s, so not a lot of development there for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, very
But I
good.
mean, because it got so good, right?
Right. I mean, you can't beat it. It flies wonderfully. I mean, I fly one myself. I'm
Yeah.
not complaining about it, but there is the biggest change is the schemes. Everybody's doing their own scheme. That's about the big change. But
Cool.
so here I am. I just bought myself a Flex Jet, and I'm interested in trying this stuff out. Where do I go to
Yep.
find out some information on the patterns I got to fly? All the information I need to get started to kind of learn and try this out.
Yeah. So it's on Jet Aerobatics. Let me just check this. I think we just changed the location. Jet Aerobatics. Let me just double check the location here. Um, yeah, it's jetaerobatics.net.
Okay.
Or you can go to our Facebook page. So if you're on Facebook, there is an F3S page on there that we do a bunch of promotion on there, and all the sequences are available there as well. And it's easy to get a hold of us through their messenger as well.
Okay. And
Or send
do you put the events up there too if somebody wants to go watch an event?
We do, and we're trying to put more of that on the website now so that you can have more of the training material and stuff. It's not so easy to put all that stuff on Facebook, but
Hmm.
yeah, all the links are there, and a lot of people around the world get involved on the F3S page because they can interact easier on the Facebook page. You know.
Right. Right. Well, very
Yeah,
good.
yeah. I mean, definitely check it out. We have the FlexJet would be great for the EDF class for sure. It's funny, we came out, and I remember the first year we brought this out, the Nats, and then we had a lot of guys fly two classes, which is great. They'll come out and fly, F3S, or they'll fly scale, and then they'll fly the EDF class. And excuse me, the EDF class was funny because you had guys flying some of the BVM all composite, EDF, 10, $12,000, jets, and we
Right.
had a guy show up with one of those foam stingers.
Yeah.
You ever seen one of those?
I
Yeah.
have. I have. I love that plane.
Beat the hell out of everybody with it, won the class.
Isn't that something?
Not about
Well,
the
there you
money,
go.
you know?
Yeah, it's funny. There was a big argument in one of the threads about the 10S versus 12S, and finally, and I think it was Jason Schulman who put it out there. I don't remember for sure, but I think it was. He says, "Look, if you're not beating anybody with 10S, you're not going to beat anybody with 12S." So there
That's
you
brutal but true, right?
go.
Yeah,
Yeah, no
yeah.
doubt,
But
no
I could
doubt.
where I could see that being an advantage for everybody is batteries, right? The batteries will
Yeah,
probably last a lot longer, right?
right. Not generating as much heat, and I think it's more future proofing in my
Yeah,
mind. Because things are going to be developed, and we don't know what the voltage is going to be, what the different motors and batteries are going to be out there. So that's kind of my opinion on that. But man, I really appreciate you taking the time and speaking with us. It's so interesting. I mean, there's so many things we could talk about. Jets for hours. I mean,
oh
it's
yeah.
so cool for sure.
It's a different world for sure, and it's one of those things that you don't really understand it till you kind of peek at it, and you're like, uh-oh. Either really think it's cool, or you're like, oh man, I don't know about that. But to see a jet go through a sequence, that's where usually people with the precision aerobatic side of things get hooked.
Hmm.
Um, that's really what it comes down to. And we have had some bigger events too. There was an event a couple years ago called Red Flag,
Uh-huh.
and that was of course not anything to do with FAI, but it was a jet precision aerobatic type event. I think Andrew Jeske won the
Hmm.
top class there, and we had freestyle. We had all that was international level class. So I think you're going to see more of this. There's a lot of interest in it for
Hmm.
sure. So
Oh,
I think
absolutely.
you'll
The
see that.
Red
Yeah.
Flag was the first time I really saw a lot of videos with freestyle, and oh, it was amazing. It was amazing. So, well, very good. Well, thanks again. I appreciate you being on the show, and hopefully, as things progress, we'll have you back on. And we'll talk some more jets.
That sounds great, Rich. Thanks for having me on, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Take care. Thanks for listening to the episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I would like to correct something that I attributed to Jason Schulman. It was actually T.N. Walker on RC Groups that said, "I can tell all of you one thing with absolute certainty. If you can't fly the pattern with 10S, you will not be able to fly it with 12S. Keep in mind, you still have to fly it." Check us out on Facebook under RC Aerobatics Podcast. A very special thanks to my good friend John Gros, who wrote the song Deep in the Mud that is used as the show bumper music. Check him out on his website, www.johnpapagros.com. A link is in the show notes. See you at the next episode.